Hello, my name is Donald Lewis, Professor of Entomology at Iowa State University, and it's my pleasure today to talk to you about something that's been in the news quite a bit, and that is declines in the population of butterflies and pollinators, not only here in Iowa and the upper Midwest, but around the country and around the world. So we're going to focus on particularly one insect, but use that as a generality for things that you can do to help pollinators and butterflies around the state. As we think about the monarch butterfly, we'll talk about its life cycle and habits, and this is a spectacular insect with some unique characteristics that make it all the more special and make us all the more concerned that the populations are in decline. But what we're really focused on will be how can we establish habitats that will help the monarch butterfly and at the same time help all of the other pollinators and beneficial insects that we depend upon. The monarch butterfly, of course, is in the order Lepidoptera, and master gardeners and others immediately started thinking of, that means it has a complete life cycle of 4 stages: egg, larva, pupa, and adult. And in the monarch butterfly, we sometimes refer to the larva as a caterpillar, and especially for butterflies, we refer to the pupa stage as a chrysalis, when the miraculous transformation, the metamorphosis from ugly caterpillar to beautiful butterfly takes place. The complete life cycle of the monarch butterfly in the breeding season of the middle of the summer takes about a month from the time a female butterfly lays an egg until that egg has fed and grown as a caterpillar, made the transformation in the chrysalis, and emerges as an adult. That happens a couple of times a year here in the upper Midwest, and then something spectacular happens, and that is monarchs cannot survive our Iowa winters. Therefore, they have to escape like snowbirds to some place where it will be warmer through the winter so they can go into a hibernation and survive at temperatures that are above freezing but still a little bit cold. So in the fall of the year, when our temperatures start to cool, and especially when our day lengths start to shorten, the monarchs from Iowa and from out the entire upper half of the eastern United States will migrate to a mountain range in south central Mexico, where they will hibernate by hanging on the trees at about 9,000 feet above sea level. People recall that in the past, when this migration was taking place in September, we would see these huge clusters of monarch butterflies on trees and shrubs. They would wait overnight on a tree, and then they would resume their journey the next day. So they fly for a day, they fly south all day long, then they rest overnight, and they continue. One of the things that people have noticed is that these migration clusters that we used to see in the fall of the year don't appear to be happening anymore. Butterflies are still passing through, but because of the declines in the population, we're not really seeing the numbers that we used to. So this is what it looks like on a map, that all from southern Canada down through the eastern half of the United States, every monarch butterfly that's going to make it through the winter has to travel up to 2,000 miles to get to that south central Mexico overwintering site where they just wait. And if the weather is good, and if there's not a lot of snow and freezing rain, if there's not a lot of landslides, if there's not logging in those forests, then the butterflies survive down there, and monarchs return in the spring. When we talk about monarch life cycles, we usually divide into seasons. We have spring monarchs, we have summer monarchs, we have winter monarchs. So the winter monarchs were the ones that spent the winter down in Mexico. The spring monarchs are the ones that fly only as far north as northern Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, and they breed a spring generation of monarchs. Those monarchs then continue the journey north, eventually arriving into the upper Midwest, where they have a summer generation of monarchs. And for us here in Iowa, over the last several years, the arrival of the monarchs has been in May. Now, if you added up those generations, the fall generation migrated south, then those winter monarchs migrated north, they made a spring generation in Texas that migrated here. What we get back in Iowa are the grandchildren of the monarchs that we sent to Mexico. So we don't get back the same butterflies we sent. We get back the grandchildren of those. But once they arrive back here in the upper Midwest, they go through about 2 generations every summer. And up here in the upper Midwest is where most of the monarchs for the entire United States are produced, and they're produced on milkweeds in that summer breeding population. So from southern Canada down through Missouri, with Iowa being right in the heart of it, is where the monarch butterflies are going to reproduce. That decline that was mentioned earlier is real. There's no doubt you are seeing fewer monarchs and you're seeing fewer butterflies than you used to. It's real that we are not seeing those fall migrations like we used to. And there's not any one cause for this, but lots of things can go wrong at all those different points in the life cycle of the monarch butterfly and in all those different places. So one of the problems we have seen is the loss of overwintering sites, but also as we look around the upper Midwest, we realize we've lost a lot of the breeding habitat where the monarch butterflies should be repopulating. That loss can be graphed by Monarch Watch with the help from Natural Heritage Foundation and others, where they go to Mexico over winter and they measure the area that is occupied by hibernating butterflies. And back in 1996 and 97, that was 18 hectares, which is about 40 acres. That dropped to a low of only 0.67 hectares. That's about an acre. Back in 2013-2014, that winter period. So this huge decline has been measured in their overwintering site, and what you see is the good news of 2014, 2015, and up through the spring of 2016 is that populations have rebounded slightly, but still not anywhere near back to where they used to be. So the population of monarchs certainly can be measured in this way, and we can document the decline that we have seen. There is no one reason for these declines, and unfortunately, one of the major problems with reproducing monarchs appears to be unfavorable weather. If we get ice storms in Mexico, the winter monarchs don't make it. If we have droughts in Texas, the spring monarchs don't find milkweeds to reproduce on. If we have droughts in the upper Midwest, the monarch population will decline because of a lack of a food source. So that uncontrollable factor, just the changes in weather, may be a big part of it, and favorable weather appears to be why the monarch population has rebounded slightly. Deforestation in Mexico is an issue, and there are units that are trying to protect that overwintering habitat. But the one that we notice is the loss of milkweeds here in the upper Midwest. And this is something that old farm boys like myself have noticed, that the milkweeds that used to be along our roadsides aren't there anymore, and the milkweeds that were in fields certainly aren't. And of course, the whole focus on milkweeds is that the milkweed is the only food source the caterpillar uses for its growth from egg to adult stage. Why have we lost so many milkweeds? Why is there so much less food for the monarch butterflies? One is our change in herbicide use. We now use herbicides over vast areas where milkweeds used to grow, and the change in that pattern of herbicide use has certainly reduced the milkweed population. Farming practices have changed, urban development has changed, and of course, if we take a longer view, we know we have eliminated most of the prairie and the wild areas in the state of Iowa and other areas of the Midwest to development and other things. Pesticides, insecticides may be a part of this, and of course one of the long-term worries is what about global climate change as we move the breeding population of monarchs farther north, or as their overwintering site becomes warmer over the decades, what change will that have? This loss of milkweeds has been documented by researchers here at Iowa State University, and what they found was between 1999, when a census of milkweeds in fields was taken, until 2010, there was an 81% decline in milkweeds in fields. The estimate is that back when I was a kid, decades ago, there were probably 40 to 50 milkweed stems per acre. And now as we look across fields that have treated with Roundup and other herbicides, as we look across cornfields and soybean fields, we see almost no milkweeds. And so that's a huge part of the loss of that. But milkweeds have also been declining in other areas, such as fence rows and in pastures and prairies and meadows and so forth. So overall, we've lost about 58% of the milkweeds that we used to have here. So what can we do to help monarchs? Well, all those factors we talked about we could chip away at. We can't change the weather. We can contribute to organizations that help the monarch overwintering sites. But the real issue is we can provide more milkweeds for monarchs because that is the exclusive food of the monarch caterpillar, and because the butterflies use nectar from milkweed flowers for their energy source. The milkweed is a really valuable plant. Unfortunately, it's called a weed, and so our first tendency is to try to eliminate that, and we've done a pretty good job of that over the years. But the monarchs and other butterflies, the bees and the other pollinators, require those kinds of plants that are specific to their needs, and that's why reestablishing milkweeds wherever we can, in gardens, roadsides, agricultural areas, putting milkweeds back into fence rows, putting milkweeds back into prairies, is an essential part of the recovery, and it's what we can do. One of the things we know about milkweeds is they grow in sunny locations, and so those of us with shade gardens are a little out of luck to help with this, but where we can, seeds, plugs, plants can be added to the areas to provide that food for caterpillars and the nectar for the adult butterflies. So certainly there are places that we can mix this in, where we can reestablish milkweeds that used to be there, areas where we're making new plantings where we could include milkweeds and pollinator-friendly plants. All of this is described in a new pamphlet that we put out from Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. Pamphlet number RG601 is called Gardening for Butterflies and Pollinators. And it's a 4-page pamphlet that goes through the detail of the life cycle and also gives plant lists, not only milkweeds that you could plant for specifically the monarch, but what other plants will do well here in Iowa that you could put into a garden that would favor the pollinators. So RG601, Gardening for Butterflies and Pollinators, is available at the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach store. You can download it online, and your county extension office can help, or you can contact us here on campus for help with that particular pamphlet. We have about 17 different species of milkweeds here in Iowa, and that's one of the things that sort of surprises people. I was surprised, at least, to find out that there's not just one kind of milkweed. I knew about common milkweed from having walked beans when I was a kid, from having seen it grow in roadsides and so forth. And as a gardener, back when I had a sunny garden, I knew about butterfly milkweed as a prairie plant that I could establish in my garden for its pretty orange flowers. Those are the two that people probably think of when they think of, can I plant milkweeds and which ones should I plant? So common milkweed and butterfly milkweed are sort of at the top of the list, but we have many more to choose from. And out of that 17, there's really about 8 of them that are available, commonly used for monarch habitat reestablishment. And of those 8, it really boils down to 4 that are used most often when you plant milkweed for monarchs: the common milkweed and butterfly milkweed, as I mentioned, but also a species called swamp milkweed and the world milkweed are ones that do well for us in our gardens and in our locations. Now, establishing a monarch habitat doesn't have to be anything special. It can be your entire garden. It can be a part of your garden where you say, I'm going to favor the monarchs in this particular location. One program that gives you some specific guidance on how to establish a monarch habitat is called the Monarch Waystation program out of the Monarch Watch at the University of Kansas. They remind us that a butterfly garden can be as small as a window box. It can be as large as a field, but if you're going to establish a habitat that's likely to get used by butterflies, it probably needs to be at least 100 square feet. As I've already mentioned, milkweeds and The nectar-producing flowers are going to do best in a sunny location, and that means at least 6 hours of sun a day. And it's good to mix things up. For the milkweeds, you need a bunch of plants and probably at least 2 different kinds of milkweeds. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't make monarchs put all their eggs on one kind of milkweed. You can mix it up. And you can also mix in those annual, biennial, and perennial plants that will provide nectar. And Monarch Watch is one place that has information. The pamphlet I already mentioned is a place that has information. Out of University of Minnesota, there's an outfit called Monarch Joint Venture that has lots of information about plants that you can plant. The Xerces Society has a website that helps you find milkweed seed if you wanted to plant large areas. And here at Iowa State University, through Extension and Outreach, we have pamphlets and information. And we also have a program called the Iowa Monarch Conservation Consortium. Consortium means there's just a lot of people involved, and in this case, it's a lot of organizations from the State Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship and the Department of Natural Resources, the farm grower groups, the chemical commodity groups, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, a couple of other colleges, the U.S. Department of Agriculture Soil Water Conservation Service. All of these are involved with coming together to see if we can pool our resources to find out how to best reestablish milkweeds and monarch habitat in farmland in Iowa. The pamphlet I mentioned was geared toward gardeners, but what we're also doing is research to evaluate what milkweeds do best in Iowa. Will the female butterfly find all those milkweeds equally acceptable? Will the caterpillars grow equally well on all those different milkweeds? And then, if you have an existing farm habitat, the Monarch Conservation Consortium is looking for ways to put milkweeds and nectar plants into existing areas, but also establishing new monarch habitats. And they're going to do this through their research, but then also publish that through presentations, pamphlets, field days, and so forth. So things like modifying crop reserve program acres, modifying grass waterways. How can farmers do more of this? And that research is being done on our Iowa State University research and demonstration farms and on the farms of over 60 cooperators and collaborators who are testing different milkweeds. They're trying planting them different ways in hopes of coming up with answers that will help agriculture be a part of this as well as the gardeners themselves. So at our Iowa State University research farms, we have these milkweed plots where people can come see how the different milkweeds are growing, what the different kinds look like, and also they can come and study how the butterflies use those milkweeds as well. We have 9 milkweeds in our demonstration plots, and the 4 I mentioned earlier for gardeners are the ones that are doing best in our research plots as well. So the common milkweed and the butterfly milkweed that we know from so well, along with the swamp milkweed and the showy milkweed and that world milkweed, those are the ones that we're finding at the top of our list so far. So, in summary, what can you do? Well, you can preserve butterfly and pollinator habitat either on your farm or in your garden. And by and large, that comes down to one term: increase biodiversity. Biodiversity so that we have a variety of blooming plants throughout the year. We have a variety of plants that serve as food sources for caterpillars. And the other thing you can do is check very carefully your use of pesticides and especially insecticides to make sure we're using them sparingly and judiciously and never spraying insecticides on plants in blooms as one of the things we can do. By increasing the diversity of our plantings, we increase the available nectar and pollen sources, and that will help the pollinators, the butterflies, and the natural enemies that we depend on out there in the fields. And remember, we're talking about sunny locations. We would prefer native plants if we can get them. We like to use local plant sources when possible. And don't forget, it's not just flowers. Trees and shrubs can be part of your pollinator and butterfly habitat as well. What we're searching for is a season-long bloom that provides a variety of flowers with a variety of shapes and colors that will feed the nectar, will provide nectar for the butterflies as well as food for the caterpillars. Monarch butterflies, thank you for all the efforts that you might make. And I thank you as well. And if you ever have questions, I hope you'll get in touch with me here at Iowa State University. It's always a pleasure to talk to you about butterflies, gardening, and how all these things fit together. So stay in touch.